and today is Friday, September the 4th. The year is 2020, and on this September the 4th, I want to begin by giving a birthday shout-out to my brother Andrew, who today turns 24 years old. So a very happy birthday to him. And now we get rolling with our Brian on Baseball program. I am Brian Goudsward. We weren't with you last week. Thought it was best to take a week off in light of all that was going on in the country and all the games that were being boycotted in baseball and in other sports. It started with the NBA with the Milwaukee Bucks, but baseball was certainly affected as well, with many games being boycotted, and good for the players, of course, for taking a stand. And you just hope that the message was received and that we can have better times ahead in this country. We got a lot to get to on the show today. We'll do our usual segment, taking a look at the series to watch this weekend. It is a loaded schedule in Major League Baseball across the country today with 20 games, including 5 doubleheaders. So we'll highlight a few of those later on, plus this day in baseball history and more. And of course, we'll get to the Subway Series game from yesterday in what was a wild one. But I have to begin today with the passing of Tom Seaver just a couple of days ago. The news coming late Wednesday evening. And even if you're someone like me who never watched Tom Seaver pitch, you know the kind of impact that he had on this game and, of course, on the Mets as a franchise, where he is the very face of the franchise, the undisputed best player in history. There's no question about it. Some franchises you look at and you ask who is the best player, and for some it's pretty easy, and the Mets are one of those teams where you ask that question and immediately it's Tom Seaver. The kind of impact that he had, 3-time Cy Young Award winner, over 300 wins, just such an iconic figure with this franchise and all of baseball for that matter, being a Hall of Famer. And if you know the history of the Mets, you know that the early years, it was a major struggle to say the least. And when Seaver first arrived onto the scene, the team was still a laughingstock, but the days that he pitched, they were still must-see. They were championship material on those games because of his presence. And it didn't take long before the Mets turned things around in a huge way with, of course, the big triumph in 1969, the stunning World Series victory coming from nowhere to upset the Baltimore Orioles, who were heavily favored. And Seaver, of course, a huge part of that team and a huge part of the Mets for years, and his legacy will go on forever. So sad news, Tom Seaver passing away at the age of 75. And it was kind of ironic that where the Mets were at the time the news broke was playing a 2-game series in Baltimore, the same opponent in that 69 World Series. So it's kind of funny how things happen sometimes. And, you know, I think it might be safe to say that he was looking up from above last night watching his old team. That perhaps played a role in what the Mets were able to do on the field yesterday at the hands of the Yankees in what was a wild Subway Series affair. And boy, if we had more of these games, I don't know how much we all could take, because these games have just been so crazy. Think back to last weekend, the Mets were riding high after that Friday, sweeping the doubleheader, hitting a walk-off home run in the opposing team's ballpark, and then things got away the rest of the weekend. Wild pitch, Yankees win the walk-off in one game there. Then the following doubleheader the next day, the Mets blow a big lead. Yankees rally. Edwin Diaz blows the save. What else is new? And the Yankees go on to win. But these games have featured a flurry of activity, and yesterday was no exception. It did not seem like a game that the Mets were going to win with Robert Gsellman on the mound. Neither starter fared particularly well. Yankees seemed like they had it in the bag. They had leads of 3 runs on multiple occasions, but give the Mets credit, they kept pecking away. They tied the game in the 9th off Aroldis Chapman, home run for J.D. Davis, and then we saw just some atrocious base running on both sides. First, before the Davis home run, Billy Hamilton trying to steal third base, down by a run, made absolutely no sense. And then after the Mets tied it, you go to extras. You start with the runner on second base, DJ LeMahieu with a little fly ball to right. Tyler Wade misread it, thought it was going to be a base hit. He's doubled off. Inning quickly comes to a close, and then the Mets lead off the bottom of the inning with Pete Alonso, who desperately needed a big hit like that. It has been tough sledding for Alonso, who was such a rookie sensation a year ago, but has hit the sophomore wall here in his second season and has been scuffling mightily the last couple of weeks. So for him to get that kind of a hit on that day against that opponent with all the circumstances surrounding the Mets, the emotional scene that it was at Citi Field, even without fans in the stands, just a great all-around day for the Mets and the kind of win that can really lift your spirits, and you hope you can take the momentum into the weekend. But with the Mets, this season has just been such a roller coaster ride that it's just hard to know what to expect. And now they've got the Phillies coming in. It's going to be a tough series. Philadelphia comes in playing very well, but we'll see if the Mets are able to keep it going. And it's funny because I thought I was going to be starting here talking about the Mets on a very unpleasant note, because early in the week things were not going well. We talked about the events of what went on there at Yankee Stadium. Then they dropped the first game in Baltimore, and things just really did not look like they were going well. Throw in the fact that their approach at the trade deadline, to me, made absolutely no sense. Getting a catcher who's barely hit this year, bringing back Todd Frazier, which I get it, he's a guy who's very well liked in the clubhouse, but I just didn't think that was what this team needed. Another corner infield bat. Offense has not been the issue. J.D. Davis is already back in the lineup, but so be it. They made the moves. They won't necessarily hurt. I just don't think they help all that much. And I thought the approach from Brodie Van Wagenen was really just to make these moves to say we did something rather than do absolutely nothing, because I just don't think they make that much of an impact on the field. We'll see how it goes, and you hope that yesterday was a step in the right direction for the Mets as they will continue their homestand against the Phillies, who, as I mentioned, are playing very well. They come off a 4-game sweep against the defending champion Nationals. Early on in the year, you looked at the Phillies lineup, and Bryce Harper and JT Realmuto were both red hot, but they weren't getting a lot from other guys. Well, since this lineup has really heated up, and Rhys Hoskins, who's a very streaky hitter, you figured he was going to pick it up, and he has, as has Andrew McCutchen, Gene Segura as well. Didi Gregorius has been very steady at shortstop this year, so this lineup is clicking on all cylinders right now. And then you look at the rotation, and old friend Zach Wheeler is pitching tremendously well. He's got an ERA of 2.20. Him with Aaron Nola, that forms a pretty formidable 1-2 punch with the way both of those two are going. So the question for the Phillies now is, did they make enough improvements in the bullpen? Because early on they were surrendering games left and right, but you have to give them credit. They realized there was a big issue there. The front office made moves. They got 2 relievers from the Red Sox, Hembree and Workman, and then they got also David Phelps at the trade deadline, a guy that Joe Girardi is very familiar with working with the Yankees. So I look at that team, and I think they're pretty complete right now, and in a National League East that's bunched together, got a lot of teams in the mix. Even the Marlins are. The one team that's not is the Nationals, which is very surprising. But this is going to be an interesting weekend, starting tonight with Jake Arrieta on the mound. He has struggled, and the Mets will counter with Rick Porcello. Great matchup coming up on Sunday when Jacob deGrom squares off with Aaron Nola. And then the Mets will see Zach Wheeler in the finale of the series on Monday. As for the Yankees, where things are not as rosy right now, and a couple weeks ago, the injury bug started back up with this team. It has continued. They have seen key player after key player hit the injured list. Aaron Judge was out. He came back for 1 game in Atlanta and then re-aggravated the injury, so who knows when we'll see him again. Stanton continues to sit out. Gleyber Torres. So they have gotten DJ LeMahieu back, which is big, but this team just doesn't look complete right now, and they're making fundamental mistakes. They're just not playing good fundamental baseball, which I think is the thing you have to be most concerned about, because last year they had so many injuries, but guys stepped up in their place, and we saw career seasons out of Mike Tauchman and Gio Urshela and others, and it's just a lot to ask for those guys to repeat that kind of performance again this year, and we haven't quite seen the same kind of production. It's been really the Luke Voigt show, and DJ LeMahieu has done his job, but they're not getting a whole lot else from other sources. And then you throw in Garrett Cole struggling, which nobody saw coming, and this team has a fair amount of issues to deal with. The bullpen has struggled, case in point yesterday against the Mets. Chapman doesn't look to be himself. They're waiting to get Zach Britton back. So the big thing right now is to just wait on getting the big guns back in the lineup and hope that you can make a run in the playoffs. But right now, it just doesn't look all that likely, given the way they're playing, given that they are not playing well at all against the best team in the division in the Rays. They've beaten them only twice all season, and the Rays have separated themselves from the pack, from the Yankees in this division. So I said 2 weeks ago I wouldn't be concerned, just because I thought the track record of the Yankees in dealing with injuries and looking how they handled things last year, that they would be okay and would be able to handle their business again. But the way they're going right now, I think you have to be concerned on a lot of levels. As they hit Baltimore this weekend, they are one of 5 doubleheaders today, and the Orioles have not been a pushover this year, as just about everyone expected. They're only 4 games over 500. They've been kind of pesky. They've been better offensively than people thought. So the Yankees normally make Baltimore their home away from home, and of course it would be nice to have Gleyber Torres in the lineup, who just abuses the Orioles at Camden Yards, but they'll have to go without him and hope that they can get the bats going against a suspect Oriole pitching staff and see how they fare this weekend. So that's the rundown on the locals. Of course, another big story this week was the trade deadline, which had a totally different feel to it than a normal year because, well, this isn't a normal year. After all, it's 2020. But there were a couple of teams that made significant improvements, none bigger than the San Diego Padres, who were very busy. And general manager A.J. Preller, I just think, looks at his team and says, it's go time right now. They have so much talent on the roster, even though it's not a normal season, being 60 games. He says, why not? Let's go for the World Series title this year, and let's make a lot of improvements to this ball club to make it a World Series contender. And they went out and made this team a whole lot better. They got a big upgrade in the rotation, getting Mike Clevinger from Cleveland. They gave up a haul of players to get him, but at the same time didn't give up any of their blue chippers, the Mackenzie Gore and others in that very deep farm system. And when you have that deep of a farm system, it allows you to do what the Padres have done. And so, yes, they parted with some of their more marginal prospects, couple pieces off the big league roster, Austin Hedges, Josh Naylor, but to get a guy like Mike Clevinger is big for a rotation, and you throw in with what Dinelson Lamet has done this year and others that are coming down the line, this team looks dangerous. The one thing that was interesting that they did is something that has never before been done by a team, which is to completely revamp its catching situation mid-season. And they went out and acquired not 1, but 2 catchers. They got in a big 7-player deal with Seattle, Austin Nola, a guy who was a late bloomer, who's really come into his own, is having a big offensive season to be their lead man behind the plate. And then they got Jason Castro, who's a veteran, more known as a defensive presence, who had been with the Angels. He's been around the block. So they just gave up on Hedges, who was a guy that they just waited to hit. He's always been an elite pitch framer and great defensively behind the dish, but he went to Cleveland in the deal, and they have gone now in a totally different direction with their catching situation. So that's kind of interesting to see how that'll play out, given that they have to learn a whole new pitching staff. And then they also boosted the bullpen with the acquisition of Trevor Rosenthal, who had gotten off to a nice start with Kansas City. And the bullpen, surprisingly, had been an area of weakness for the Padres. So often that is a big strength for them, but Kirby Yates was ineffective early in the season and now has been lost for the rest of the year. So San Diego probably in need of just some bodies there, and they go out and get Rosenthal. So you look at this team now with the way they hit and the home runs and how exciting they are. They have clearly closed the gap in this division with the Dodgers, and I think are poised to make a run come the postseason. I did not think this year was going to be the year for them, but sometimes, you talk about windows for teams. Sometimes the window comes unexpectedly, and I think they're probably ahead of where they thought they would be. But sometimes that happens. You start the year, you get off to a great start, you see some great performances like from Fernando Tatis Jr., and you say, let's go win this thing this year. And that's what they've decided to do. And now look out if you're San Diego, because this is an exciting team that has gotten better, that has few weaknesses now, and is ready to go toe-to-toe with the Dodgers come October. And speaking of the Padres, for the next segment, as we take a look at the series to watch this weekend, and there's a lot of choices with all the games that you have on the slate for this Friday, but I'm going to stick with the San Diego Padres, who this weekend are going to be taking on the Oakland A's in a very good series. This is two of the better teams in the game, two that I've spent a lot of time talking about in the brief time that we've done the show here this season. And now the Padres, with all their new acquisitions, they just played a couple games with the Angels this week, lost yesterday in Mike Clevenger's debut for his new team in a 2-0 shutout. Now they head up in the northern part of the state, in the Bay Area, and meet Oakland. The A's have been so good, but you might be wondering, what have they done lately? Well, they haven't been in action now in over a week time because of COVID-19 issues. So it'll be interesting to see if the A's immediately pick up where they left off, or they were going really well. They're 10 games over 500. This is a team that has been very well built. I've talked a lot about the guys at the corners, Matt Chapman, Matt Olson. The thing is, the stars on this team haven't even completely clicked offensively, and the team has been so good because they have that flair for the dramatic. They have the ability to come back late in games, and they weren't all that active at the trade deadline this year. Only acquisition they made at the deadline was acquiring Mike Minor from the Rangers, who has not had a very good year. He was excellent last season for Texas, not so much this year. Last week, they made another trade getting Tommy La Stella, who I thought was an underrated pickup from the Angels. Second base has been one hole for this team, so La Stella can kind of figure that out. And so that's two of the better teams in the game going head-to-head. It starts tonight with Zach Davies on the mound against the young Jesus Luzardo, who a lot of people are very high on, the left-hander for the A's, one of the top prospects in their system, who's had some up-and-down results so far this year. But I look for that series to be a very good one. I look for a lot of home runs. Both teams have very deep and powerful lineups, and they're both fun to watch. So when you take a look at the slate this Friday, that was the one that stuck out for me, the Padres and the A's from the Coliseum in Oakland, starting this evening. Now, the 20 games on the schedule today is the most games in one day in baseball since 1974. I think I saw there was only one day that had more games than 20 in the history of the game. So it is wall-to-wall baseball with 5 doubleheaders. Being that there are so many games, normally for this segment I go through all of them and give you the pitching matchups, but I think you'd probably start to get bored after I got to around, 12. So I'll skip that and just give a couple of highlights. And the pitching matchup of the day has to be at Wrigley Field tonight, where the Cardinals and Cubs are going head-to-head, and you find Jack Flaherty matching up with Yu Darvish. Yu Darvish probably the front-runner for the National League Cy Young Award, and I don't think that's something that anybody saw coming. Jacob deGrom still very much in the mix for that, as he's going after his 3rd consecutive Cy Young Award, which is something that only 2 others in the history of the game have done. But Darvish has turned things around in a big way. This is a guy who's been an enigma in his career because the stuff has always been there. He throws about 10 different pitches. He's been great at times in his career. He's been dominant. Texas, Dodgers, he was a big disappointment, especially in the World Series against Houston. The Cubs, he's been trying to find himself since he signed that big deal, but it is all clicking for him now. The ERA is under 1.5. There's about 5 pitchers in baseball right now who have ERAs under 2, which is rather astounding, and Darvish one of them. So a great series there, rivalry with the Cardinals and Cubs, and a great pitching matchup because Jack Flaherty, no slouch in his own right. Also in the National League East, we have the Nationals and the Braves. You look at the National League right now, there are not too many teams that you pronounce completely out of it. The Pirates, one. Diamondbacks, who've been struggling mightily, are another that have quickly faded. And the other is the defending champion Nationals. Things just have not gone well. Steven Strasburg has only made a couple of starts, and he's now out for the season. Offensively, they have gotten tremendous performances out of Trey Turner and Juan Soto. Turner's been the hottest player going the last week or so. He's raised his average about 100 points. Juan Soto is doing his thing. He's slugging close to 800 this year. So those two hitting 1 and 2 in the order had been unbelievable, but they've gotten next to no production from anywhere else. So it has been a tough go for the Nationals, and I think this was something that we saw coming. There's always the risk for a World Series hangover, and this is kind of a year where, you work through some things. It's the first year without the big bat of Anthony Rendon. Carter Kieboom, thus far, disappointment, has been optioned to the alternate site. So the Nationals, I think, will be fine in the long run. Not necessarily this season, but given that pitching staff with Scherzer and Strasburg and Corbin, that's going to keep them competitive in the years to come, and they'll figure out things offensively. They still have enough to work with, so I don't think necessarily the Nationals' window to be competitive is over, even though they've taken a drastic step back here in 2020. As for the Braves, the question right now is, do they have enough pitching? Because they didn't do a whole lot at the trade deadline. Only got Tom Malone. That's a modest upgrade, to say the least, from Baltimore. So I just don't know that there's enough there. The injury to Mike Soroka was an enormous blow. Max Fried has been great. The left-hander has not lost this year. He's one of the 5 pitchers I mentioned before who has an ERA under 2. But some of the pitchers that they had high hopes for once were well-thought-of prospects in the system, whether you're talking about Sean Newcomb or Kyle Wright. They just haven't lived up to it yet. Maybe they will eventually, but it's not happening this year. So the Braves are very complete offensively. They're going to score a lot of runs, but the question as they head into the playoffs is, do they have enough pitching to do anything to make any kind of noise? And then the final series that I'll highlight is the Rockies, who will be in Chavez Ravine taking on the Dodgers, who, kind of gets boring talking about the Dodgers with just the beat going on, but that's just what it is. You knew going in this team was going to be extremely difficult to beat. They're 29-10. They've won 10 games in a row at home, and there's really just no area that you can point to and say it's a weakness. Now they get the Rockies this weekend. Antonio Senzatella, Dustin May is the matchup for your late Friday night. And one thing that's happened for the Dodgers this year is Clayton Kershaw is back to pitching top of the league level, and that's big because the last couple of years he just hasn't been right physically. He's dealt with the back issues, he's dealt with the diminished velocity, and just hasn't quite been the same. Well, this year, you're not going to say he's back to the Kershaw of old because he doesn't have the same velocity, but he's learned to work with what he has, and he's pitching very effectively. He was great last night in the win over Arizona. So this pitching staff now, with him pitching the way he is, Walker Buehler was a little shaky early on. He's picked it up. The young gun Dustin May going tonight. So this team is just so complete, and the bullpen has been tremendous. You wondered about the signing of Blake Trinan because he struggled last year with Oakland after what was a tremendous season the year before. Well, he's back to tremendous level from 2 years ago this year. And Kenley Jansen, another guy who's dealt with a host of physical issues, including heart surgery. He's looking more like the Kenley Jansen of old. So that's been kind of the one bugaboo for the Dodgers, is locking down games late with Jansen not necessarily being completely right and getting the ball to him. Well, now the bullpen's going great. Offensively they have endless resources. Even with Justin Turner now on the injured list, they just have so many guys that they can plug in, people to play all over the field, and it doesn't even matter that Cody Bellinger is not following up his MVP season like an MVP this year. They just have so many ways to beat you, and Corey Seager is healthy this year and looking like the best version of himself, so the Dodgers what can you say? I mean, they're 29-10. They're clearly the best team in the game right now, and it's just a matter, can a team like the Padres, who I talked about before, and all their moves, yes, they closed the gap, but the Dodgers are the class of the division and probably the sport right now with the way they're going. And they've just figured out a way to build this team, to identify players that fit with what they want to do, and it's just all working. And with that, we will move into this day in baseball history, and it was on this day, September the 4th, 1993, when Jim Abbott threw one of the most memorable no-hitters in MLB history. Abbott, born without a right hand, entered the record books as his Yankees defeated the Indians 4-0. And we close the show today, as we do each and every program, with the ninth inning, where today's nugget comes from something the San Francisco Giants did, another team that's been one of the surprises in baseball this year. They start a series with Arizona tonight, and the big surprise for the Giants has been what they've done offensively. Well, Tuesday night at Coors Field, which is a ballpark that can yield some big run totals, well, they put a hurting on Rockies pitching, did they? 23 runs, 27 hits, and a 23-5 thrashing of Colorado, and there were some enormous individual performances, none bigger than Alex Dickerson, 5 hits, 5 for 6 with 3 home runs. The Giants in this game had 3 players with 6 runs batted in, Brandon Crawford and Donovan Solano, the other 2. That's the first time in the history of Major League Baseball that a team has had 3 players with at least 6 RBIs in a game. So a big performance from the Giants, who are a couple games under the 500 mark, but are not that far off from a postseason spot, and that is something that nobody saw coming into the year. I remember looking at their lineup. They played opening night, the late game, that first doubleheader against the Dodgers. You couldn't even recognize some of the guys that were in this lineup, but they have turned things around, and we'll see if they're able to sneak into the playoffs. It's been a nice story out in the Bay Area. And with that, that will conclude this edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. I thank you for listening today. Hope everyone enjoys their Labor Day weekend. Always a good weekend to watch baseball, and plenty to watch, especially today with the almost record-breaking 20 games on the schedule. So enjoy it. We'll be back for another one next week. Got the Mets and the Phillies, Yankees and the Orioles, 2 divisional showdowns. Yankees with a doubleheader. First game starts at 5:05 this evening. Thanks again, and our thanks as always go to Dylan DePrado. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at Brian Goudsward, as we say so long from Middletown, New Jersey. Have a good one.